Welcome to the Oral History Broadcast. I'm Ray Mofield on WCBL Radio, and today we're visiting at the home of Mr. and Mrs. Rawl Smith again. And this time we have as our official guest Mattie Jo Hill Smith. As she taught in Marshall County for a good many years and is widely known to many of you. Her brother was an agriculture teacher in the system for a good long while, Morgan Hill. And so she is very widely known. We thank you very much for letting us come. Now, were you born in the county?
Yes.
And your father's name was?
Tom Riss.
Tom Riss Hill. And was that right around Benton, or was it?
Well, I was born around Benton, yes, here.
Yeah.
He came from out in the county, out in down at Elva.
Elva. I remember that. It was on a railroad station, wasn't it? On the NC in St. L. I've been through there on the few mighty trips that I have made out of Hardin on that line to go to Paducah about 2 or 3 times in my life, I guess. But I remember Elva. All right, and your mother was?
My mother was Lorena Morgan.
Lorena Morgan. So there comes some Morgan blood.
Yes.
Now, they had all the money in the world, didn't they? J.P. Morgan and...
I'm not sure we're one of them.
Okay. Of course, there are lots of Smiths, more than anybody else, but there are a good many different sets of Morgans in the county.
Yes,
3 or 4.
there are. Yes.
So, I remember a boy that was in Benton High School when I was at Hardin, played basketball, and I can't tell you his name, but everybody called him Muckle. Muckle Morgan. Did you ever hear of
Yeah, his name was Howard.
Howard. Yeah, okay. Well, I could not remember what his name was. But he was a great guy. And his son, as a matter of fact, worked at Murray State as a television engineer for a good while in my department. I may have hired him. I've forgotten now whether it is or not. But anyway, he did well. So you were born near Benton.
Yes.
And did your dad farm? Or what?
Yes, my father farmed. When we children were small, he followed the pattern of many people at that time, working in some city, Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't do that very long because my grandfather died. And when my grandfather died, then he returned to the farm permanently.
Mm-hmm. Well, as you say, an enormous number of Marshall Countyans and other Kentuckians and people from Tennessee and West Virginia and all over the southern states, perhaps all rural areas, looked for jobs. They went to work for, well, a lot of them went to work for Henry Ford when he started making cars on a big scale back about, 1914 or so. They brought out the Model T in the fall of 1908, and it was a 1909 model. And after that, they really began to make cars. At one time, we're turning out over 1 million a year Model Ts. There's a lot of those flippers. And they had to seem like about all the West Kentuckians that could crowd up there, working in those places or in other industries. But your dad was probably like mine. My father went to Detroit one time, tried to get a job, and somewhere or other they wouldn't hire him. You know, they'd look out at you. If they didn't like your looks, well, they'd wave you away. So then he went to Chicago and got a job as a Boilermaker with the Illinois Central Railroad, and he worked there about 4 years. And then the Depression came along, and they started cutting back, and he came back to farm, his first love anyway. And he never would leave after that. So your dad saved a little money. And,
Well, maybe.
he tried to,
Yes,
I'm sure. And then he got back into agriculture again.
Yes, after my grandfather died.
Yeah. That gave him a bit of land, I suppose.
Yes. Yes.
he could control. Now, how many children were there in the family?
There were 4 of us.
4 of you. And let's see, Morgan was, I
Yeah.
guess, maybe the only one I knew. I'm not sure. The
But
other.
I have a younger sister that lives in Reedland, and then I have a sister who's deceased.
Mhm.
My sister worked for civil service for years and years, and she died last year.
Now, Morgan was widely known among the farmers because he, in that particular Smith Hughes agriculture program, they gave advice on kind of seed to sow and sprays to use and what have you. He was quite a corn grower too, wasn't he? I know over the years he's given me enough corn to I could have lived on it for a good while. And he always had the best corn, it seemed to me, of anybody that I knew about. Well, did you go to Benton school
Yes,
all of your career?
yes, here. We lived in the Benton district. The whole-
Starting in the first grade?
Yes,
Yeah.
Miss Georgia.
Miss Georgia Brandon.
Yeah.
Now, she's a remarkable person.
That's
I imagine
right.
you might tell us a few stories about her. She's still living out at
Yes,
the
she is here.
nursing
Oh,
home
Miss
here.
Georgia's a dear friend.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. She,
I interviewed her on this program one time, back, I guess, when we first started the broadcast, and she's really a remarkable person. I'm sorry I didn't have the pleasure of attending school when she was teaching. But I guess that of all the famous Benton teachers that I can think of, that first come to mind when you mention Benton teachers, when I was at Hardin, it would have been Miss Georgia Brandon, Margaret Heath, everybody always remembers her, and Hattie Fawn,
that's right.
who was a famous
Yes.
English teacher and so on. That reminds me of a funny story. Rayburn Watkins, who was a great buddy of mine, he and I debated together at Murray State, although in high school we were debating against one another. But we were still good friends. And he invited me to a Benton reunion. And it seems to me it was the class of 38, 39, and 40. There were 3 of them that got together. Well, there was a boy that came in, was one of the funniest fellows, other than Bob Hope, that I've ever heard. And he got up and told a story, and he said, 3 of the most pleasant years I ever spent in my life were the 3 years I was a senior at Benton High School. Well, that really brought down the house. They all just roared, you know. So then he said, I'll explain myself. And he tells that he was supposed to have graduated in the class of 38, but he didn't make it. He lacked English was one of them, and there was another course. I don't remember just what that was. Might have been math under Matt Sparkman or somebody. So he stayed over the year of 39 to take those classes, and he passed one of them, but he didn't pass English. Hattie Fawn flunked him again. So he went the year of 1940 and did graduate. And that's the reason he told that story. So I remember those teachers with a great deal of pleasure. Anyone else you'd like to recall there? What did you like most in school?
Well, I liked English, and then I liked home economics.
Mm-hmm.
Here, Miss Ruby Love was my 7th and 8th grade teacher. Mr. Naaman Duke was the 8th grade teacher.
Yes, I remember both of those people. Mr. Duke was
Oh, well, I could,
county
you
official
know, I
at
could
one
go
time.
back for all of them here. Miss Hilda Aaron was was my second grade teacher.
I don't remember her.
Well, she's Miss Hilda. She was Miss Hilda Hyde.
Well, that sounds very familiar.
Well, that's
Hilda Hyde does.
Yeah. Yeah. And then my third grade teacher was Ina Jo Pace.
Hmm.
And the fourth grade teacher was Miss Whittenberg. Her husband was the superintendent, principal, or something. And she was the fourth grade teacher. And then Aline Lovett, then Miss Ruby Love, Mr. Naaman. And
I
then
always had a group of dedicated individuals over those years that stayed up to date, knowledgeable. I guess they maintained discipline, so you had a teaching atmosphere. Sometime in there, let's see, Matt Sparkman came. Was he?
Yes,
Was
yes.
he principal? Or?
and when we were in high school, when I was in high school, yes.
Now Ted Chambers was
Yes, the
superintendent.
Uh-huh. He was after Mr. Whittenberg.
And back in those days, those officials taught, didn't they?
Yes, Mr. Chambers was the ag teacher.
And the principal always taught. Maybe he'd get some reduction in load for taking care of the principal's business, but if a regular teacher taught, six, seven classes, then the principal would teach 5 and take care of all the school's business, and sometimes serve as basketball coach on top of that. And yet they turned out a remarkable product. Now, are we just surveying more, or why is it that today we have all these books about why Johnny can't read, and there's such a great number that they get their high school diploma and they can't read and write? I noticed one young man down in Florida, as I remember, is suing the school system because they gave him a diploma and he couldn't read and write. So he went out to look for a job, and nobody would hire him. So now he's sued the school system because of that. Now, what was so much different?
Well, I really don't know. There's a difference, completely different attitude towards school and teachers and whatnot. But I'm not much of an authority on the why of those things here. We have so much bigger classes here.
Yeah.
Where we used to have 1 first grade or something. Now you have 3 or 4. I can't see that would make the difference in the teaching, but there are lots more students.
Yeah. Well, of course, the population of Marshall County has grown from 8,000 or 9,000 up to, I believe the last census, something like 26,000 or so. And although the number of students hasn't risen quite in proportion to what it would be in some areas, because many of those people are retirees.
Right.
However, there still are far more students than there once were.
Of course, the attitude towards learning and how you teach and so forth varies. It goes from one way, and they go to swing over one way in one direction, and then not long they see that there are mistakes in that, and then they start teaching it then to do it another way to try to correct what they're doing wrong.
One article I read placed a good bit of the blame on reading to the abandonment of phonics, where you.
Well, I'm not a phonics teacher. Somewhere along the line, that was when I learned to read. It wasn't the phonics way. They were teaching it some other way then, sight, where you just recognize the word. And I'm not good at phonics. I did learn to teach reading by use of phonics, but I had to work at it.
Mm-hmm.
Use the manual to work at it because it wasn't natural with me.
Yeah.
I'm not a good speller either.
Well, the old time schools and way back in the very early days, they had a lot of spelling bees, and many of those people were good spellers. I recall one experience I had. I was going to Stone School in Callaway County and had a spelling bee. Well, I had won the Callaway, the spelling championship. And so at this spelling bee, you stood up till you missed a word, and you sat down. Well, at the end of the time allotted, there were two people standing up, myself and my mother. Well, now my mother had only gone to grade school 18 years before I had. She was 18 when I was born. And, you know, I was just about that age where I kind of thought I was pretty smart. And I didn't dream my mother was that smart. When we got home, I said, "Mother, I didn't know you could spell like that."
My grandmother was a good speller, and she spelled phonics with using phonics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, whether the method was involved or whatever they did, somewhere they did in those days turn out some very great spellers. Well, you grew up and you met your husband, what, at the high school?
Yes, yes.
Were you in the same class?
No, he was ahead of me.
Uh-huh. He's one of these seniors that looked down and picked out a freshman that...
Well, something like that.
Okay. Oh, that's wonderful. And then you were married, and he had to go off to war.
Yes, here.
That's a pretty sad situation
That's right.
for you
That
then, wasn't it?
it's-
What did you do while he was gone?
Well, at the time that he was called into service, he was working for TVA. And so we were living in Murray. And make gasoline rationing and so forth. And so
3 gallons a week on
so
an
we
A
lived-
card. Yeah, I
we
remember
lived
that.
we lived in Murray. And when he got his call for service then, why, I moved back to my with my father.
Mm-hmm.
After my grandfather died, then it wasn't but about 3 or 4 years until my mother died. And so that left my father with my grandmother, who was my mother's mother.
Mm-hmm.
But we all went ahead living there together. And she stayed with us.
Yeah.
And then when the...
And you had one baby about
That's
that
right.
time.
We had one little girl, and so we came back home. I came back home, moved back home with them,
Yeah.
and stayed with them while he was gone.
I guess you did a lot of writing letters.
Yes, I did, religiously.
Yeah. Oh, I can remember writing those letters when I was in the Navy, and am I remembering correctly, you just put your name and serial number up there and you didn't have to have a stamp?
That's right. Daddy didn't.
Yeah.
He didn't have to have one.
And of course, when you wrote one to him, you had to have a stamp.
He was good to write too, and of course he didn't know that here, but I didn't have, of course, I went with him to camp when he was in the States, and then Susan and I went with him.
Down in Mississippi.
In Mississippi, and then he was transferred over to Camp Forest out of Tullahoma, Tennessee, and we were there a while, a year. And in the meantime then, when he went overseas, then he was good to write.
Yeah. But you had to spend 3 whole cents
Yes.
To write a letter. First class is now 22, isn't it? And they're predicting it'll be a quarter before the year's over, I think, or maybe next year it'll be a quarter.
I kept every letter and had it filed in,
Chronological order.
by the
Yeah.
calendar,
Mm-hmm.
every letter. And when he got home, he couldn't believe that. And he'd reread those letters and tell us what all happened at that particular place.
Yeah. Stack of mail that would choke an elephant here.
Well, it was written on really special paper to keep the weight down.
Do you remember V-mail?
Yeah.
That people overseas, you'd write as
Yeah,
real light stuff, and they'd send it by air. I
Yes,
guess
that's right.
It
Yeah.
all came by air,
Yeah.
so you got it.
And it was a small, condensed.
Yeah, that brings back some memories. And then here on the home front, you had quite a number of things to worry about. You couldn't buy all the sugar you wanted.
No, we didn't have. We
Had to have stamps.
Stamps for sugar. Of course, we lived on a farm, and we had lots of. My father was we raised what we ate,
Mm-hmm.
and
Couldn't buy meat.
no,
without
but
stamps. Shoes, you had to have stamps.
tires.
Oh yeah, and sometimes even with stamps, you couldn't even find a tire.
That's right.
And many things that didn't take stamps. Now, 3 gallons of gas didn't take you very far, did it? A week.
Well, while he was gone, I'd substituted some, and then the year that he was going to come home, I had here the teacher was a high school graduate, and she just refused to go back. She didn't have a degree, she didn't have a certificate, and she refused to go back, and so they insisted that I go, and I did, one-room school.
Mm-hmm.
And Susan, I took her with me.
Where was this?
Brazil.
Uh-huh.
And Mr. Rose, Holland Rose, told me, I asked him, I said, I told him, I said, I'll go to school if I can take this child with me. Well, he says, there's 2 things you'll have to do. And he said, she'll have to have a smallpox vaccination. She can't enter school without it. And she was only 4.
Mm-hmm.
Says she can't go without that. And then says she'll have to be issued a book. So we did that.
That made a student out of her.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And she learned to read when she was here. She went in the 1st grade, and she learned to read at that school.
And Susan was a smart girl anyway.
Well,
now, you wouldn't say so, maybe.
She learned to read.
Yeah.
And I remember then when she got eligible. Then her birthday was late in the year, and she was eligible to go to school, even though she wasn't 6.
Mm-hmm.
She was able to go. Eligible to go to the 1st grade, and we lived in the Benton district then, so I was going to send her to the 1st grade. Well, my brother just thought that was so awful that she could read so well, and that she was going to go to first. But she was too young to go to school
Mm-hmm.
to start with.
Chronologically, she was not fully developed.
Well, and then in a one-room school with her mother for the teacher, she had missed out on so many other things that she needed she needed the social contacts, but then she needed I hadn't had time with all the grades to do all the extras and so forth, and she had missed out on so many things.
You were in that era probably when you had to, in one room you had to teach 6 grades.
That's right.
Earlier,
I had 4 students. There were 3 other students in the 1st grade with her that year. And then her father was home. He came home right before Christmas. And I just called and told him that I wouldn't be back.
Yeah.
But it was a 7-month school, and school was out in January.
Yeah.
You know. started in July.
But now, did that taste of school teaching set you off on a lifelong career?
Well, that's the only thing. That was a pattern around here. That's what everybody did.
Yeah.
That's what everybody did, and then if that's you taught in a one-room school, or before I married, I had taught in a two-room school with two teachers.
And you decided then to go on to Murray and complete your education.
I didn't until well, after Philip was born. They kept calling me to come and substitute, and so I did. I substituted, and then first thing I knew, they were asking me to take a half-day service, and I did.
Yeah.
And then the next thing, and so then I finished my degree. I didn't lack too much. I had lost several hours having waited so long to finish it.
Yes.
But I went.
Changed the requirements just a little.
Yes, in there. And so then I went from provisional elementary certificate. I went over to Murray then one summer and one winter, and on Saturdays and at night and whatnot, and finished my degree.
Yeah. Well, Janie got her bachelor's, but she did the master's by going on Saturday morning, Monday night,
But when I did
summers.
my degree though, then I had two children and we lived on a farm and here.
Now that kept you rather busy.
Yes, I had to choose how much I would do.
Yeah.
No, I didn't do as much outside reading as some people did because I had less homework at night and meals and whatnot. So I didn't.
But you were always regarded as a good teacher. And,
Well,
and
I don't
I'm
know.
sure you were.
I don't know
Now,
about that.
If we had Janie Bell here, she'd testify about Susan. She thinks Susan was just one of the greatest that she ever had. And I presume she was right. So, all right, tell us about your grandchildren.
Well, we have 4. Susan has 2. Her daughter graduated last year from high school, and then she's down at Wake Forest and in North Carolina.
Wake Forest has moved from Wake Forest to Winston-Salem.
That's right, and that's where she is here.
Yeah, I was there on a conference last year. So.
And then her other daughter is younger, and she's in high school. And Philip's children, our son, has 2 children. One is 13 and one is 9. The little boy is 13 and the little girl is 9.
We had our banquet out at the old R.J. Reynolds mansion, which the school now uses as a conference center. It was, it's fabulous. It's hard to imagine how a fellow would build a $10 million house. And the dollars back then were worth about 100 today, I guess. Now you're retired, you're enjoying life,
Yes.
you're taking it easy. Do you get to visit your grandchildren?
Oh
much?
yes, we visit often. We do the traveling. They're all busy and we're more free to go.
Yeah.
And we go often.
Do you have a funny story to tell me before we're finished here? We just got about another minute.
No, I don't know many funny stories.
Well,
I don't.
surely in all the years that you taught, there must have been some young boy that threw a firecracker in the stove out at the one-room school or something or other.
Well, I'm sure there were. We had to.
You had to build your own fires?
Well, yes, but I would hire a boy to build the fire.
That is expensive.
That's right.
Quarter a week.
Something like that.
But it came out of rather meager pay.
Well, yes, it came out here. My first
What was your first paycheck?
$64.
$64. Well, you
And
remember
then
the $64 question
Yeah.
on radio.
Well, that's what it was. And then the year I married, it had gone to 95.
Oh, you were really getting up there.
That's right. The year I married, it had gone to 95.
Great. Thank you very much, Mattie Jo Hill Smith. We appreciate your letting us come and interview you on the oral history broadcast, keeping in memory some of the older days in Marshall County. I'm Ray Mofield. Now we return you to our studio.